Hello, welcome to the Horticulturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post every week on a Friday. So if you want to know what our continuing horticultural adventures might be, do hit subscribe.
Yes, and don't forget on Mondays we do our shorts. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below. Tell me where you're from so that I've got context, and we will try and answer your questions in our Monday shorts.
And if you've been triggered to know more about horticulture, you might want to join the Royal Horticultural Society of Victoria. They have a very tricky patron.
Yeah, me. And they have all sorts of wonderful events and a really good journal.
I'll put the link below. But Stephen, we're on an amazing avenue of, what are these?
Well, these are Picea glauca albertina,
Yes.
which is a dwarf form of one of the Canadian spruces.
And we've covered this in our epic conifer story.
Well, exactly, at Conifer Gardens.
But not
And-
why we're here.
Yeah, and this is probably the only avenue of Albertina conica I've ever seen in my life. And these are well-grown plants that are up around about the 3 metres now, and it does make quite an interesting feature in this garden, which belongs to some dear friends of mine, Barry and Ruth Murphy, who have kindly allowed us to come in and film some of the really exotic and weird and wonderful plants that they've collected over the years.
And I think this avenue maybe sort of personifies the garden. It's unexpected, you turn a corner and there's amazing things.
Yes, well, I think it's a little bit like Ruth and Barry themselves, actually. Quite unexpected.
And I think we'll start to head off and look at some things, but it is not, and Ruth and Barry are keen to say this, not a garden as such.
Yeah.
They describe it, or Barry described it, as like a wild bush garden. Basically, things are planted. If they grow, and if they don't, they don't. But there's sort of no tending to a huge degree.
No, and it's basically a wild garden.
Yeah.
But it's not a wild garden in the sense that it's just made up of local indigenous plants or something like that. It's plants from all over the world, and we'll engage with quite a number of them. Quite a lot of collectors' things, really unusual plants. But once they've got established in the garden, they, generally speaking, have to look after themselves so they don't get summer irrigation. And it's amazing what stuff they've managed to grow in this garden.
So just to contextualize for our viewers, climate, where are we? How would you describe
Well,
this climate?
we're sort of heading into central Victoria. It has quite often very long, dry summers, and it can get quite hot. We can get up to the 40 degrees and more, so it can get quite hot and dry in the summer. It drops down to frosty conditions in the winter, so they can get quite decent frosts here as well.
Yeah.
So plants have got to be able to cope with both extremes.
So really Mediterranean.
Yeah, it is really a Mediterranean style climate here, and the plants have to grow in that sort of garden.
And just for our American viewers, in Australia, we don't have the same zonal systems as you do here. So Mediterranean is the closest epithet we can use.
Yes, exactly. So yes, we're not zonal here.
But you're in zonal denial.
Yeah,
often.
I grow things I
Another
shouldn't
film
have,
debate.
yes.
Anyway, let's now go and explore some of the wonderful things in this garden.
I'd love to.
Now, the first cab off the rank, which I just thought is a horse chestnut tree, is
Yes.
not.
No, well, a horse chestnut tree, were it one, wouldn't actually still be in flower at this time of the year. It would be earlier. But it's in the right family. It's an Aesculus, and this is Aesculus californica.
Yeah.
And in North America, you tend not to call them horse chestnuts. They're generally known as buckeyes. This particular one is a Californian buckeye. So Aesculus californica, and it's a hardy, small to medium tree, multi-branch from the bottom, so it can be quite sort of broad as opposed to its height. It's pretty drought tolerant. In fact, if it gets too dry, it'll drop its leaves in the middle of summer. And then people will go, that tree's dying. And you say, no, it's just protecting itself and it will come back into leaf later. And you get these sprays of lovely white flowers on it in the high summer, followed by large seeds on it. And in the winter when it's bare, this particular one has got the most fabulous orange lichen growing on the trunks. So you can imagine what it looks like.
It does have the most amazing orange lichen. It's really quite beautiful. But my question is, the flowers are coming out at the tip of the branch.
Yeah.
When the flower dies, what happens? Does this sprout out?
Yes, you'll find you'll get new shoots next season that will come from just below where the flower spikes
So it's
were.
constantly
going out
branching
sideways. So that's why it becomes such a broad, spready, small
Right, so
tree.
it's never sort of an upright tree with
No.
a canopy. It's
No.
always a spreader.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
And
so lovely.
how much bigger will it get, do you think? I mean, how big
They can get up to about 5 or 6 metres eventually, but still not what I'd consider to be a large tree. So a smallish tree. And again, it's another one of those things that really is only tenuously available in Australia, but it's one of those plants that should be grown a lot more because it does in fact grow very well in our Mediterranean style climate.
There you go. And there is quite a delicate fragrance to the flowers.
I've never noticed. Yes, I think you're right. There is something there
There
that
is
I hadn't
something.
noticed. Yes.
All right, on to the next.
All right, let's go.
Oh, now, one of them, you just keep turning corners and there's amazing things. What is this?
Well, this is in the bromeliad family,
Oh,
and it's a genus called Dychia, D-Y-C-H-I-A,
yeah.
and they come from Brazil and Uruguay and all that part of Central and Southern America, and there's over 3,300 species in the genus, so it's a big genus. I think this might be Remotaflora, but I'm very happy to be corrected because it's not a genus I'm terribly familiar with, but it has that bromeliad sort of pineapple top-like foliage and these amazing spires of brilliant orange flowers in high summer.
Unbelievable colour, and it's in full sun.
Yeah, and
So-
it's as tall as we are.
Yeah.
Well, I'm standing uphill from it, you're standing downhill, but it's as tall as we are if you go for the average.
Yeah.
And it is a very dramatic and bold plant.
Absolutely stunning. Well, what else are we going to find in this garden?
Oh, goodness knows.
Okay, what is this?
Well, I have to say this wasn't a tree I was anticipating seeing in Ruth and Barry's garden necessarily. And it's a very obscure plant as far as Australia is concerned, and also comparatively rare in the wild. And it comes from southern Mexico and Guatemala.
Yeah.
And you sort of don't think of that in the same sort of breath as sort of Mediterranean sort of central Victoria. And it's a plant that's commonly known as the monkey hand or deviled hand tree. And it's got a wonderful name. It's Chiranthodendron pentadactylum. And Chiranthodendron means hand tree.
Yes.
So Chirantho, hand, dendron tree. And pentadactylum means with 5 fingers. So it's a 5-fingered central part of the flower. And it's related to the brachychitons and quite a lot of other things sort of in that group of plants. And it makes a comparatively large tree with huge soft leaves on it. So that's why I would never really expect it to be growing in this much drier summer climate with quite crisp cold winters. But it's obviously doing quite well. It's slightly sheltered, I would say. And as far as I know from what Barry tells me, this is the first year it's flowered, and it'll be what, 4 or 5 meters tall now. And it is one of those plants when people see the flower on it, they get quite excited. But I'm almost as excited by the lovely big handsome leaves.
That's
I
the
have
thing
to
that
say.
strikes me, because the flowers are quite hidden and they're amazing. They're almost sort of tulip-like, but quite...
Yeah, and they're thick and
quite
heavily
hard,
textured, almost waxy in feel. And the actual form and shape of the flower is comparatively unique.
Yeah.
It's a single species genus, so there's no other Chiranthodendrons out there but this particular species. And if it's happy, it's comparatively quick growing, and it can make quite a reasonable sized tree. There's a quite large one in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens.
Is there?
And it's got a trunk on it, I suppose, about 1/2 metre in diameter, and would easily be 5 or 6 metres tall and every bit as wide. So it can grow into quite a substantial tree. It's evergreen, and I think it's a tree well worth hunting out, although it's still comparatively rare and obscure in Australia as far as purchasing one is concerned.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful, and there's quite a few blooms. So if this is the first year, it's doing really well.
Yeah, well, I'd say in years to come, it's actually going to become quite spectacular, because once it gets itself really into flowering mode, it should be quite obvious from a distance.
Fantastic. Now, I know this is a bit unprepossessing, but I am so excited to see this.
Yes, and you would have been even more excited had it been in flower. So
Yes.
it's finished now. But anyhow, it's a Puya. And it's another bromeliad relative.
Yes.
And so therefore they come from South and Central America. This one I think is Puya alpestris, and it has the most outrageous blue flowers on it.
Now, it flowered just a few months ago, and Barry very kindly sent us a picture, which I'll drop in now. But the exciting thing is, Stephen, I have one of these
Oh,
in
here
a
we
pot
go.
that is that big.
Yes.
But seeing this, it's just filled me with joy and inspiration. I am going to grow that baby, and it's going to flower.
Yes, and then one day you'll
I
have
live long enough?
Yeah, well, you might live long enough, but you know, then you've got to add the other 230 odd species in the genus to your collection.
I just want this one because it's amazing. Now, this is a really woody dead stem.
Yes, and if it sets seed on it, the seed pods will get a little bit bigger than they are on it now.
Yeah.
They're not actually that hard to germinate from seed, but they do take a long time to get them up to a plant of some size, and certainly some years to start flowering.
Now, it's got a lot of pups around it. I mean, it's got lots of crowns. Would it be something you could separate and...
I wouldn't try to, as a rule. I've tried shifting Puyas before and have lost them.
Shift averse.
Yes, they shift averse. So I would tend to try and grow them from seed. I might try and cut a pup off the side of a clump and leave the rest undisturbed. That way you're not going to lose everything by trying to dig it up and divide it. And they are hard to divide apart from anything else. They're woody at the base and they're also quite prickly. So yeah, so they're dangerous to divide, I have to say. But they are beautiful plants, and the blue ones particularly are this amazing shade of blue that you don't normally see in natural flowers.
Well, I'm just thrilled to see it here in this garden.
Yes, and you never know what you're going to find in this garden.
No. This literally stopped me in my tracks. What is this?
Well, this is an iconic North American plant called Horti-Culturalists. Commonly known as the Californian tree poppy, and it grows tall, as you can see here. It's what, 2.5, 3 meters tall.
Massive. Yeah.
But it really isn't a tree as such. It's really a large semi-herbaceous perennial, and you should in fact prune the old stems out once they've finished flowering, like those ones, because they don't flower again. So I normally, if I've got a clump of it in the garden, I would normally prune the flowered stems out as they finish flowering. Now there's only 2 species, this one Culturi and another one called Trichocalyx, and Trichocalyx has slightly smaller and more crinkly flowers, so it's more poorly ironed. The flowers are sometimes rudely known as fried eggplant.
Well, honestly, that's what I saw. It just looked like massive fried eggs bouncing on the end of it.
And it's really weird because it is slightly scented, but you don't smell it when you put your nose into it. It's a perfume you'll pick up from a distance.
I can smell it here, but I can't smell it in the flower.
Yeah,
and it's a beautiful light note.
Yes, and as far as growing it is concerned, it really is quite happy as long as it has a well-drained site with a reasonable amount of sun. It will grow in quite a range of different conditions. And in fact, one of Barry and Ruth's has grown up through the cavity of a wall and has grown out through near the guttering on their shed. So it's become a roof plant. And I have heard of Romneas coming up through the cavities in walls, ending up in the back of wardrobes. Goodness knows where it will.
Tenacious.
It is quite tenacious, but it's really weird because if it's happy where you put it, it could be considered a thug and you can end up with large quantities of it. But a lot of people will plant it and they'll lose it time after time after time, even if they're doing all the right things.
Why is that?
It's just, well, technically it's miffy. It's one of those plants that either likes you and will go nuts, or it doesn't like you at all and it just won't cope even though you have the right conditions.
All right, so I would say this is a thicket.
Yes.
Now, is this really a practical plant for your average garden? So here we are on acreage and we can allow this to form a thicket, but if you wanted it in a sort of Mediterranean perennial border, would it be containable?
It's probably not containable if it's happy. It will keep moving around. But I have to say the flowers are so good that I wouldn't really mind if it became a dominant part of a major border, and it can. So if it's really happy, it can sucker for feet and feet and feet, or meters and meters and meters, and you can end up with Romnea in huge drifts.
The back of your wardrobe.
Yeah, back of your wardrobe even. But it's funny because you try and dig out a sucker and probably half to 2/3 of them won't take. So it's actually not all that commonly available commercially because it's quite hard to propagate. It hates having its roots disturbed. And in fact, if you get a little carried away and you try and dig out too much and you take bits out of the whole colony, sometimes the whole colony will just collapse and die.
Oh,
so there you go.
I'm seeing a lot of seed pods.
Yeah.
Is it easy to germinate, propagate from seed?
It can be propagated from seed, but not generally considered that easy. So sometimes it'll strike, sometimes it won't. But that's part of the allure of some of these plants. You know, somebody wants them and they can't grow it. Other people can't get rid of it. And so, you know, it is one of those interesting plants.
Well, it's very happy here. Now, whereabouts is it from in California?
Well, it comes from drier areas of California. So I would say sort of southern parts of California. And I've got a sense that it might be in some of the surrounding states as well. So.
Now, you said it's basically a herbaceous perennial. So does that mean it could be hardy because it basically dies down every year?
Well, I've seen it growing in the garden at Bodnant in Wales.
Oh, right.
So it will grow in quite a range of climates as long as it has a nice, sunny, well-drained site. So it's a matter of making it happy. Once it's happy, it will grow in much colder climates than here. It will also grow in probably hotter, drier climates than here. I think, though, that really humid subtropical climates would probably be a problem for it.
On to the next.
Yes, and there's more. as we were walking around the garden, we came across this little beauty. And it is one of those gardens where, I don't know, you just walk around the garden, some strange thing will suddenly come leaping out at you. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. It might well be that that's just a spot they had empty. And I think this is a real charmer. It's one of the bulbine lilies, Bulbine fruiticosus, which is one of the South African species in the genus, and the genus extends through into Australia, and there's some bulbines that come from the subantarctic islands, so it's quite an interesting and diverse group of plants. And this little one is gorgeous with its little sort of apricot orange flowers with the boss of yellow stamens in the middle. It flowers in high summer, its foliage is evergreen, and I think it makes a fantastic small plant for a hot sunny spot. What are you doing here? And of course, the other interesting thing is it's been planted next to something else that flowers at the same time of the year, and it's also an African plant, and that's one of the crocosmias. And I'm assuming this really brilliant orangey red one is the cultivar that is quite common around the trade called Lucifer, and makes a wonderful cut flower and a very bold, striking, bulbous plant in the garden.
Well, in our wandering around the garden, Stephen, I just thought this had a terrible disease.
Well, no, it's one of those contorted versions that pops up periodically in completely unrelated genera. I mean, we did do a whole story on contorted plants at one stage, and this is another one. This is a contorted version of Robinia pseudoacacia, and it's called Lace Lady. And it's, funnily enough, sold around the traps as quite a small growing plant that would make a great tub specimen for a patio or in a garden somewhere.
Loving the sound of that.
And it is quite nice, but I have to say it is actually quite a bit larger than I was anticipating it might grow to, and I don't think it's finished yet. It gets spikes of little white wisteria-like flowers in the early spring, and we'll look closely at the foliage is all twisted and bent, and so are the little branches. So in the winter it actually makes quite an interesting sculptural effect.
And that's the thing, the leaves do look
curly leaf.
troubled.
Yeah, they've got curly leaf. So it's one of those plants that you either love or you scratch your head about and say why. But it is really a very interesting small tree, and it certainly grows bigger than most of the nurseries tell you.
But I love it. I love the bark, I love the form, the twistedness of it, but also the lichen over this one is quite incredible.
Yes, it's getting character as it ages, and that's something that
like
some
the
of
best
these...
of us.
Yeah, no, most of us don't. I think trees grow into old character rather well. People don't always.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there you go. But yeah, so Robinia pseudoacacia Lace Lady.
On to the next.
All right. All right, Matthew, we found another interesting plant in the garden here, and it's a great sort of sub-shrub, small perennial. Some people would know it as Mimulus aurantiacus, but it's now in the genus Diplicus, so it's Diplicus aurantiacus, commonly known as the sticky monkey flower, which it is slightly tacky to the touch, so hence sticky.
Oh, yeah.
And it comes in, well, Ruth and Barry have got the orange one here and also the burgundy one in the garden, but there's also a white version and a yellow version, and it flowers for months.
And where's it from?
It comes from southern Oregon right through into California.
Yeah.
It's a small genus, the Diplicus. There's only about 48 or 49 species, and this is the only one that I've seen in general cultivation here in Australia. And I've certainly seen the yellow form around. I can't say that I've seen the white one for sale here.
Yeah. So is it, well, clearly it's in a Mediterranean environment. Is it a Mediterranean plant? I mean,
well, not strictly
it's
speaking.
from Oregon, but in terms of the
growing conditions, a lot of the other mimuluses are actually plants that grow along the sides of streams and things, so they actually like it quite wet. But this particular Diplicus seems to grow quite well in average, well-drained soil. So very easygoing, will grow in a range of climates. I don't find it a usefully long-lived plant, so it's one of those things like fuchsias and things that's often a good idea to be propagating some fresh stock on a regular basis. So you've got young ones coming along, but it has an enormously long flowering period, so it really pays its way in the garden.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, it's really good.
On to the next. Well, Stephen, on our journey through the garden, this looks like an arbutus.
And funnily enough, it's related, but isn't an arbutus. This is in the genus Arctostaphylos, and I think this one is the one called Manzanita. And the Manzanitas are a group of shrubs, all evergreen as far as I know. They extend from the subarctic right down to Guatemala.
Oh my goodness.
So they have quite a big distribution.
Quite a big.
Although having said that, there's not that many species. I think there's around about 71 or 2 accepted species.
Yeah.
The vast majority of them tend to be around sort of Oregon, California area, where this one comes from, and they're great Mediterranean style large shrubs / sometimes small trees. The biggest claim to fame is in fact the beautiful cinnamon bark, which I think is just absolutely stunning.
Yes.
But come midsummer, late summer, it's just starting to get its flower spikes on it now. It'll get tiny little pink urn-shaped flowers on it, which is lovely. The grey foliage is handsome on this species. But remember, it's got a very wide distribution, the genus, and so some of them are actually little ground covery, traily things, up to what I'd call moderate sort of small trees. So they do vary quite a bit, but the vast majority of them are drought tolerant, sun tolerant, cold tolerant, and make very, very useful plants in all but the coldest, dampest climates, because they do like that summer warmth.
And would you clean up the bottom a little bit to get a view of the bark?
Yes, well, in fact, Ruth and I were just discussing that earlier in the day,
Yes.
and she said, yes, she's got a couple of lovely trunk plants like this that they need to get in and clean the lower branches off so that they can show off the trunks properly. And I concurred. So there you go.
Another wonderful plant in this garden.
Yeah, it's just an amazing collection.
Well, Stephen, what an amazing garden.
It's been a great deal of fun to catch up with Ruth and Barry again and to be in their quirky, interesting and amazing space.
Yes, really, there are treasures everywhere we walked. There was something you wanted to stop. And what I love about the garden is that, as Barry and Ruth would say, it's not a garden. You just literally stumble across wild areas and there's amazing plants.
Yes, it's sort of a collector's menagerie of plants almost.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Barry and Ruth, for letting us wander around all afternoon. It's taken us quite some time to traverse the estates.
It's quite a big area to get from one plant to the next, I have to say.
And we will come back because there is an amazing oak collection here. So we'll do another garden story and show you more of the garden.
Yes, I'd like to do that. So probably in the autumn we'll do one on oaks, and we might even do one the following spring because there's a lot of lovely oaks that do their thing in the spring too.
There you go. But if you want to know what we're doing next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
Yes, and don't forget to press the alert button so it'll remind you every week. And don't forget our Monday shorts. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask me about your garden, why not stick it in the comments below? Tell me where you're from so I've got context and I will try and answer it for you.
Yes, he will. I won't. I'll just read out the question. But until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.